Are you all set, Bob?
You are
All right. So I would like to call to order this meeting of the Select Board for February 10th. We are coming out of an executive session that we were in for a little while. We will have our typical announcements and review of the agenda, followed by the public comment period. Under the town manager's report, we will potentially discuss our schedule. We will discuss and then sign bonds for the recent DPW building, library roof, and the ban on the communication radio project, highway equipment and water improvements, excuse me. We will discuss the vacancy on the Affordable Housing Trust and talk a little bit more about housing in general in Groton on different committees. We will consider appointing Jonathan Bosch to the Invasive Species Committee. We will review and consider approval of the Parks and Commons policy draft that we have. We will review our liaison policy and consider assigning liaisons to the various elected boards. And then we will discuss our schedule through Springtown meeting, potentially a budget update. We have at 7:15 the Parks Commission.
That has
They're
been,
not coming.
they're not coming.
Right. So that will be
Yeah, this
pushed
is gonna
until
be
the
pushed on to
24th.
the 24th, yep.
Okay. Then we have other business, our typical list of ongoing issues to review, potential for liaison reports, and a set of minutes from February 3rd. Does anyone have any announcements?
I will not be wearing a tie to the next meeting.
Alrighty. Any public comment? All right. Not seeing any of that, then we'll move on, Mark, to your report.
Yep, as you can see, Mr. Hartnett is here tonight. The purpose of him being here is for the board to sign the bond and ban for the various capital projects that I went to bid last week. As I told the board and the Finance Committee in joint session on Saturday, nothing but good news with regard to the results. Our AAA bond rating really made the bonds attractive to the various bidders. We did incredibly well in the permanent 20-year bond and the 1-year ban. The bid process was both extremely active and very, very competitive, according to our financial advisor. We had 12 bidders for the general bond, and we had 6 bidders for the ban, which is really, really competitive, which is great news. The low bid on the bond, which encompassed the DPW garage of $4.6 million, the library roof of $1.1 million, and the fire truck of $508,000, was a true interest cost of 1.832%, which is amazing. When we had done the budget estimate on this bond, we had figured a 3.5% interest rate based on where the market was when we started putting this together, and based on what we saw when we did our senior center bond. This came in unbelievable. And the fact that they're paying a premium of $501,000 allows us to borrow less money than town meeting authorized. As you can see, town meeting authorized 6.2. We're only going to borrow 5.8. So that's a savings to the taxpayers as well. Yes, Josh.
And you had mentioned that the other day, and I think that's great, and you're mentioning it now, but when you look at the schedule, why is it showing 4% in 2021, and by 2040 it goes down to 2.2?
The true interest rate over the life of the bond is 1.8%. The interest rates fluctuate, but if you look at that schedule, at the end of the day, we're only paying $1.3 million worth of interest on these bonds.
If you do the math, it comes up to
1.8%.
That's what you get paid to do.
Which I did, yeah. The coupon rates that you see, Brianne talked about it a little bit when we borrowed for the senior center. I don't quite completely understand the way the coupon rates work, but what we're paying on is the true interest cost, as Mark just said, at 1.83%, with a $500,000 bond premium.
To me, that bond premium
we're receiving.
Yep.
We're receiving all the money next week, the full 6.2 million. It's just that we're going to pay back 5.8 million plus interest.
They're actually paying us money to borrow our money.
Yeah, this is
It's amazing.
quite amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. So Piper Sandler and Company, I don't think we've done any business with them,
Not
but they
since
were the
I've been
low
here.
bid of the 12 bidders that bid on the bond. The second one was the ban, and that went to Oppenheimer and Company, and they actually paid a premium of $760 on the bands. So that covers our costs. So there's no additional cost to bond to our financial advisors and other things to run this, to do this bond anticipation note. So this covers the safety radios of $424,000, the highway equipment, $176,000, and a water project, the Whitney Well of $243,000, which, by the way, they pay their portion of that cost. That doesn't, we do not pay that. That comes from water ratepayers. So the net interest cost on this band is 1.41%. Last year when we did this and we rolled over the band last year, it was 2.3%. So it's dropped almost 1% in a year rolling that band over, which is unbelievable. So we hit the market at the right time. Our AAA bond rating really knocked it out of the park. And these are two really, really great projects for the town of Groton right now. So what we're gonna ask the board tonight, I sent you out the vote.
Yeah.
First, I need you to appoint a temporary clerk. That's the first thing I need you to do, because the clerk has to sign certain paperwork.
One thing that's worth noting, though, is
Yep.
I think that I understand why the true interest cost is 1.8 rate. Is because when they give you the premium back and you apply the premium, that factors into reducing those rates. So one of the things you can look at is you have a fire truck for $506,000 and you have a bond premium for $501,000, so we're getting a fire truck for $5,000.
You could look at it that way.
That's a good point, yeah.
I like that, Josh. But do you remember when Josh, when I had brought that to you and I asked you to give me the 20-year life and I estimated the cost difference to be about 60 grand? I think we talked about that. Well, based on this, the cost difference is about 30 grand. So it's actually a better deal than I even presented to you that night, to do that, to save me the $140,000 in the capital budget. So it ended up working out good, well for the town. So I sent you out the vote. There's so many numbers in here, to read it into the public, nobody would understand what we were saying. So I would ask two things of the board tonight. First, I would ask you to appoint a temporary clerk to sign the vote. And then I would ask you, once you do that, to authorize or take the vote, authorizing the clerk to say that the board did vote to issue these bonds and bans.
I move that we appoint John Geiger as temporary clerk for tonight.
Second.
All in favor? Or, well, John, are you willing
Do you
to serve in
accept
that?
I'll serve.
Sorry, John. Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? You're good with this?
Can't vote for myself.
I
Oh.
think you can.
I think you can, but, okay. So I would entertain a motion regarding the actual borrowing then.
I move that we authorize the town clerk to sign,
Nope.
Not
Excuse
town
me.
clerk, but temporary.
excuse me, the temporary select board clerk to sign a permanent 20-year bond and a 1-year ban, or do you want separate votes?
No, it's in the same vote together.
And a 1-year ban, bond with Piper and Sandler and Company for $6,251,125, and a ban for $843,454, terms as explained within the document
That'll be attached to the minutes of this
attached to
meeting.
the minutes of this meeting.
Perfect.
I'll second.
Okay, but
Okay.
before you, when you appointed me, you didn't put a time limit on it.
Tonight, I said
Right.
tonight only.
Tonight.
Okay.
Did you get that done?
I did, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought, is it?
Okay.
So I have 3 sets of paperwork. I'm
Wait,
sorry.
wait,
Well, let him vote
We
first.
have
Okay,
a
I'm
motion
sorry.
and a second. Do we
Sorry.
need to do roll call since this is financial?
You know something, why not? I don't think you do, but why not?
I thought we did, but.
I don't think you do, well, you might. I don't remember.
What was,
Venusian,
Alice's
aye.
question?
Roll call vote?
It can't hurt, right? I mean,
No.
And I,
Pine, aye.
Geiger, aye.
All right,
unanimous.
it is unanimous.
Okay, now Mike.
So I have 3 sets of paperwork. The first one is just for John only to sign 4 copies of the vote that you just made.
Yeah, I've been warming up here.
So I have that. Unfortunately, then we have a small amount of band paperwork, which will be easy. The bond paperwork, it's got a lot of tabs on it because of the $5.8 million total. Piper, the winning bid, put them in increments of $295,000. That's the way they're going to go out and sell it to their customers. So if each of you want to take one of these, you know,
So we all have to sign all?
for your own investment, I'm talking about. You know.
But those require everybody's.
Everybody's signatures.
So I need I need John only here, band paperwork and separate bond paperwork, and Dawn is willing to get that done during the course of the night with you,
Okay.
with your help, if you would, and I sincerely appreciate it.
So if you want to just
Good.
get up,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
That's separate votes.
That's the band paperwork. Where's the stuff for John to sign? John, that's for you to vote.
Do we want to do it during the meeting or just hold it for now? So that
You
we
could
can
do it
get
as we're
all
talking, whatever is easy for you, for the board. But there's a ton of signatures that the board has to sign.
Understood, I'm just hesitant to get it.
Okay,
Yeah,
then let's wait till the end of the
Along
meeting.
as we're-
Mike, please.
Why don't we wait till the end of the
That would be
meeting?
great.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very
We'll
much.
have these for you tomorrow.
Thank you.
So, as directed by the board last week, I set aside time tonight for the board to continue its discussion on how to fill a vacancy on the Affordable Housing Trust. In addition, the board asked for a summary of the duties of the various housing committees that the town has to deal with these issues. So that's the Housing Partnership, the Housing Authority, and the Affordable Housing Trust. And what I put in the packet for you is what the charges are of those various boards. The Housing Partnership, Housing Authority, and of course, the Affordable Housing Trust. I know that Peter and Michelle are here and representing the Housing Partnership, and I know Fran is here with the Affordable Housing Trust. If you have any more specific questions to ask, and then the board can talk about how you want to go about filling that vacancy on the Affordable Housing Trust. So I'll stop talking.
So Mark, do you know off the top of your head, and obviously if you don't, I completely understand, how many people are on each of these boards?
Yep.
And then who they're appointed by?
Yep, the Affordable Housing Trust has 5 members appointed by the Select Board. The Housing Authority has 5 members, 4 of which are elected to 5-year terms, which is appointed by the governor, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the Housing Partnership is supposed to have 7 members?
5.
5 members, okay, 5 members. Do we have a full complement on the partnership now? There's 3 members on the partnership now. There are 2 vacancies. So,
And they're appointed
they're appointed by this board.
by the select board?
Now, help me out here. Allison asked me a question at the beginning of the meeting, and I wanted to make sure I was right. The Housing Authority is statutorily required. The Affordable Housing Trust, we created that through a deed. We didn't have to do that, but we decided to do that.
And
the
it was
Housing
a
Par-
vote of town meeting, right?
No, it was a vote of this board. I don't believe we went to, did we go to town meeting on the
Town
Affordable Housing
meeting?
Trust?
Town meeting.
I think town meeting authorized it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. And then the Housing Partnership, if we want to be able to participate in LIPs and things like that, we have to have a Housing Partnership, but there's no other requirement. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
And take
Yeah,
the mic.
please grab the microphone, guys.
It's my recollection that the Housing Partnership was created in the late 1980s when the Brookfield Commons plan was proposed, because that was the first round of the Homeowners Opportunity Program, which was something that was put in place when Michael Dukakis was governor. And the purpose of having the Housing Partnership was to have a committee in town that would assist the developer through the daunting permitting process, so that it would be a, as it came to be known, a friendly 40B rather than something that was adversarial and controversial. So the Housing Partnership exists for the reason of helping developers through the process, through the friendly 40B process, which has to be endorsed by the select board in order to qualify as a LIP.
But that's the requirement. If we didn't have a Housing Partnership, okay, but that means we wouldn't be able to participate in some of these programs. I just wanted to make sure I gave Allison the right information.
Thank you. Yeah, Becky?
Can I ask, just, because I'm still learning all this stuff too, that the Housing Opportunity Program, does that still exist?
I don't think there's any new dollars involved with that. A lot of things
Okay.
have come up and gone away as funding has disappeared. Some units were created as a result of it. In Groton, that's good, but I don't think it's still there for us.
So, I think, I know Anna had mentioned at a previous meeting that there were other programs under which we built some of the existing affordable housing, but I wondered if,
There's a place for a sign-off for the housing partnership under local action units that come up with, regular subdivisions that choose flexible development, for example.
I have another question. The fact that there's only 3 of you and you have 2 vacancies, is that a problem currently?
I wouldn't say it's a problem, but I think it would be, good if we had a full complement of people. So we certainly are open and would encourage anyone that might have an interest in housing production, affordable housing production, to, get in touch with, I guess, with the town clerk's office or with Fran and or submit their committee interest form to this board.
I looked on the town website, and the most recent minutes for your committee were in 2017. And I understand that was when we thought we were preparing a local plan, a friendly 40B, and then that changed. And so, does that mean there hasn't really been anything to do for you?
We haven't had, we've met a couple of times with some developers. We haven't met that often. I would say perhaps 3 times over the course of last year, if that much. Well, 2019. Well, no, we did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's sporadic that we've been meeting lately.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
we'll have a fresh set of minutes as we do this evening. We'll share those with you.
So what is and I don't know to whom I'm addressing this question, what is the ongoing benefit to the trust?
To having the trust?
Right, so we have 3 entities that, in my mind anyway, seem to overlap significantly. And I'm just trying to figure out why we need all 3.
I think of them in terms of they were created over time. So Groton Housing Authority first, then the Housing Partnership, and much later the Affordable Housing Trust. And a lot of them were created in response or to take advantage of where the funding was at that particular time for affordable housing. But there are things that certain entities do better than others, like Groton Housing Authority is a owner and landlord of low-income rental units. That's their main charge. They had other duties that have tacked on, and they've done other cooperative projects with the town that have added to their inventory. The Housing Partnership, I think, exists in a way as sort of an advocacy group, as well as let's tell you how Groton works and what Groton is interested in, which helps shape projects that come into the town. But the projects have to come into the town, developers are asked to approach. That's a little bit the sporadic nature of when they meet and what they do. They also, as a group, can look at other affordable housing plans that are coming out, like the Housing Production Plan, and review that. The Affordable Housing Trust was a response to, as we moved away from the 60s, from federal government funding all affordable housing and their deeply subsidized rental units, to a proliferation of ways to subsidize affordable housing, shallower subsidies, state, federal, zoning incentives, tax credits, all this different ways to try to get affordable housing that's not just the housing authority. Then they found a way to do an affordable housing trust and then have powers to use some amounts of money to act more decisively in a way, instead of just encouraging a project but no funds. With the Housing Partnership, a housing trust might say, we really like the idea of this kind of unit or this sort of configuration of the parcel. Here's some money to help you do that, or here's us speaking up for the project in front of your committee. And the Affordable Housing Trust, with money, can directly go out and build units or fund the creation of units, and the Housing Partnership does not hold money. Nearly any town who's interested in affordable housing, once they pass the CPC, they often create an Affordable Housing Trust to give them a way to direct the expenditure of that money. If it's the Affordable Housing Trust, then it has that town stamp on it of what the town wants to do through its committee. The CPC is broader. It doesn't have to send money to the Housing Trust. It could fund a separate project as long as it meets the CPC community housing guidelines. think there's work for all of them, but knowing how they got created over time is helpful in thinking about what people's roles are.
So does the trust administer the CPC housing bucket, or they're different?
They can apply for some of
They can
that
apply
money.
for, okay.
There are some communities in the Commonwealth who automatically, every year with their CPC housing bucket, CPA housing bucket, automatically turn that amount of money over to the Affordable Housing Trust without any projects. Some communities do that. Our history has been, we applied for that money for a specific project.
Okay.
Nothing prohibits the town from providing that money to the trust without a specific project in hand and letting them spend that money as they deem appropriate.
Okay. And does the trust currently have funds at there?
There are right now in the trust, correct me if I'm wrong, about $12,000 or $13,000 left over from the original project.
40,000, 45,000.
Mostly spent that down, so there's about $200 or $300 from the original CPC grant to the Affordable
Yeah, but how much is in your,
But there's about $46,000 or $47,000, $48,000
Okay.
from the Squantook Hill money
that's right.
that was mitigation funds that the select board directed to the Affordable Housing
Correct.
Trust. That's not held back with the restrictions of the CPC.
Okay.
And-
the authority doesn't have any funding?
So the Groton Housing Authority receives most of this money from the federal government that flows through the state.
Okay.
And so it's state aid, some is actual state money extra, but no money and no resources go from the town to there. We get some local representation, but the state dictates everything that they're doing.
Okay. Wow. What other questions do folks have?
Those are good questions.
As I understand it, the Affordable Housing Trust could also, I think it says, could also fundraise and accept donations directly. And in my reading of it, it sounds sort of like the idea was that in creating affordable housing trusts was to give towns a way that perhaps they could act more nimbly toward creating housing without some of the steps that we as a board might have to go through, getting approval at town meeting for expenditures.
You, having that money, the trust with the money that they have in their funds or whatever, they can spend that money on housing without any future appropriation.
Right.
Sort of how the Conservation Fund works for the Conservation Commission.
Right.
That's why a lot of towns just give the housing bucket money to the
Right,
trust.
and another thing that I
Automatically.
read was that a number of towns intentionally have one member of the Affordable Housing Trust sit on the Community Preservation Committee, in part to facilitate some of that. And for whatever reason, we didn't do that in this town.
Michelle has something.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Please.
I just wanted to add that the Groton Housing Authority that had two projects that were constructed with federal and state funds, which was the housing on at the end of Willowdale, Groton Commons, and Petapawag on Lowell Road. They also worked with Mass Housing Partnership, which is a state agency that is a financing agency to build the 9 units of affordable housing on Sandy Pond Road that were constructed by David Moulton as part of the Rocky Hill subdivision, but then purchased in fee by the housing authority once occupancy permits were issued, and all of the financing came through the Mass Housing Partnership, which enabled the town to have those 9 units, which are low-income rental units. And I think the very important role of the housing authority is meeting the needs of people at the low-income level of the affordable housing spectrum. And I think they manage all of those properties and manage all the rentals of their properties and everything too. So they have a very important role in creating, maintaining, and managing affordable housing.
questions? Yeah, John?
I have a question. I know I have a concern, and I think one or more other members probably also have the same concern. And that's that we have these three organizations, but it isn't clear that they've come together and identified a specific objective that they're all working for. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on how you could envision more cooperation and collaboration between these three entities that we have.
I mean, my response would be, each have their own, I think, distinct roles. Clearly, the Housing Authority has state, it's established by the state, there's statutory responsibility, and anything to do. I know that we have worked, and we've worked with some of those organizations when a developer comes to us and have talked to them about how they might partner with what the developer might have in mind. In other words, if a developer is coming in and wanting to do a certain number of units and some affordable, we might try to work with the Housing Authority and seeing if they're interested in perhaps buying or investing in one of those units. So there are things that we can do in understanding the sort of landscape of what the housing situation is in town, what our affordable housing plan is and what our obligations are under that plan, understanding the impact of 40B. I think there's some nexus there, at least of what we're doing with that group. And then, of course, the Affordable Housing Trust, they do have the ability to have money to invest in a project like that might help. In fact, the project that Michelle was talking about down in Sandy Pond Road that Dave Moulton built some years ago, folks may recall that there was an article at town meeting to spend some money to buy down the mortgages on those units with CPC money. It didn't pass, but it was a way that some of that money could have been used to make those units even a little bit more affordable to people.
I mean, the Affordable Housing Trust has the ability, as pointed out, to apply for CPC funds out of the housing bucket. And in so much as there's more than $500,000 sitting there, if the right project came along, they could use that money to theoretically take out a mortgage for a lot more money to do a large-scale project. I can't speak for the current Affordable Housing Trust, as I'm no longer on it, but I certainly know that until the final analysis comes out on Boynton Meadow and a resolution occurs there, at least as a former Housing Trust member, I was apprehensive to go into the CPC or town meeting to ask for any more funds until that's brought to some type of reasonable conclusion. But that said, the current makeup of the Affordable Housing Trust does have the ability to seek out a project and fund it through the CPC or other sources and get a mortgage to that. And what it does is it allows the town to develop affordable housing that meets the needs within the community that aren't necessarily affordable in some ways by state guidelines and state mandate, but affordable by local guidelines and local median income numbers that occur. So I really think that maybe at some point, while there are three different jurisdictional powers of the three boards, that having a housing summit, once the housing production plan is 100% done, and I'm not sure where that's at. Is that 100% at this point?
We're waiting a couple of weeks.
Okay, so once it's done, I think it would be worthwhile even to have the planning board and the select board join in with those and have a housing summit and say, look, we've got north of $500,000 sitting here that we can't spend on anything else other than on affordable housing or to pay the housing coordinator's salary. And I think that it would certainly be worth some consideration. And we have looked at a project recently on the Country Club that didn't really pass muster. But there's certainly other ones that have been entertained in other areas of town. And it's time to start looking at doing something like that.
So can the partnership and the authority not apply to the CPA funds?
The authority can.
Can?
They have, actually, they did apply a couple of years
I
ago.
think it
for
was
something.
the authority that
The
applied
authority
for
for
the
the
buy-down, right?
buy-down.
For
That-
buy down
that's
on the
what Peter's
mortgage?
talking about.
Yeah.
And they
Well,
did
and
get
they actually
help
manage
with a
that.
backup generator for for pumping sewage if the power went out, something like that for the Pettipoag units. That was funded. It was a relatively small amount of
Yeah.
$13,000 or $19,000, but they can do that.
But the partnership cannot?
Partnership is, yeah, they're not in the business of doling out money.
You've got
Yeah,
Michelle again.
Michelle, please.
And as Josh said earlier, involving the select board and the planning board in a housing summit when the housing production plan is finished is a really excellent idea. And my numbers might be out of date because I'm not working with it day to day, but as of the last count, more than 50% of Groton's affordable housing units were created under zoning regulations through the flexible development, inclusionary zoning provisions, which doesn't give you a large number of housing units all at once, but certainly accomplishes the goal of situating housing units along with market rate units that people are not aware that they're there. People are not aware that they are the affordable units, which is an important part of the zoning provisions. But and thankfully, our numbers are high under that program because of River Court and the affiliation with Mass Development that subsidized River Court as a state funding agency, and there are 15% of the units at River Court, which are all rental units, which have to qualify as low-income units. And when you're dealing with frail elders, it doesn't take much before people find themselves in that situation.
Yeah.
So it sounds as though either of two organizations can talk to potential developers. And I'm not sure whether you do that together with that developer, or the developer winds up going to either party or both parties, and then they could be playing games, but I just don't see how that works.
Well, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my experience has been, at least with the, the housing partnership, I think, is that we see the developers that are coming in that might be thinking about doing a 40B or doing a LIP are going to come to us first to talk about that and to, talk about what their plan is, and then we can react to that. We can also, at that point, talk to them about where there could be potential partnerships that might work for them, be it with the housing authority or also using the Affordable Housing Trust as a possible, funding resource for some of the plans that they might have for those affordable units. So I mean, I can think of at least a number of occasions when we've met with developers that have come in and talked about that, and some of those plans have not come to fruition, others have. But I think we tend to be the lead on that. The housing authority really goes out. I think their plans, when they've done them, they've pretty much gone out and pursued on their own, or they've worked with other, like Rural Housing Initiative out in Winchendon, which did the, did the one down in Willowdale. They've worked with other organizations that helped develop those.
Okay, that doesn't really get to my point. The trust, as I read the documents here, has an enormous amount of what they can do. And if we're really working together, I guess I don't understand why they wouldn't be part and party to a discussion with your group, with a potential developer, as opposed to just you seeing them and then perhaps suggesting they go to the trust, or this is what I'm trying to understand, is how this all gels together coherently with multiple organizations.
Yeah, and that's happened, and it's happened, and sometimes the developers may come in, they're not that familiar with the community, and we have that information that we can share them and send them in that particular direction. So that can happen. I mean, they're not disparate, I think, in terms of what the approach might be or how a developer might pursue something.
I guess I still don't then understand how you get the trust involved. Because I guess you're making a judgment, and the trust isn't there to say, yeah, that's something we could do, or that's something we'd consider. I just don't see how that happens.
Some of what the housing coordinator does is to try to pay attention to what's going on in each of the committees, and they're tend to be some capacity and issues, and just some committees are taken up with attention to different things. The Affordable Housing Trust has been focused on Boynton Meadows for a long time now. And if someone said, how about a new project, right when Boynton Meadows is getting off the ground, it's kind of like, oh, but we'll talk about it, but later, you know, we're doing this. The Groton Housing Authority is very busy being a landlord and attending to all the many things they have to do, and that takes the majority of their staff person's time. And sometimes they have more capacity and interest in looking beyond and exploring the next inclusionary zoning unit that might be bought out, that sort of thing. Other times they have less so. They own land on Nashville Road, and they look at that every so often to see what can be built there. And, you know, we then have the trade-off of, if it gets a lot of town subsidy, is it worth a certain amount of units, or do you hold the money back and try to put your smaller amount of money into a bigger project and help leverage the bigger project? So those discussions are happening all the time, and they're usually no secrets. When someone says, I'm interested in doing a project with affordable housing, you usually hear about it right away, and people are not, they can be steered like, oh, you should talk to, but no one's being saying, don't talk to somebody else. You know, that the invitation is out there to how do we make it happen, hopefully on the terms the town wants.
Yeah, I don't see much overlap between the housing authority and the other two organizations. But I do see, I think, overlap between the two. And I'm wondering if there were
Between
more
the-
coordination and collaboration there, we could move along, and instead of just accumulating money, actually get some things to happen.
Well, this gets back to the need to have a housing summit, okay? And I think that some of these things can get flushed out during the course of the summit. But the housing partnership's role really is when a developer comes along that might want to do a 40B. And rather than it being, as Michelle had pointed out, an adversarial one, and we certainly have had our taste of a yellow building, the one here in our town, that we could do a limited initiative project, which the partnership brings forward to the select board, and the select board then works with the developer to mitigate some of the potential issues that might come up in a controversial 40B, and the select board then signs on and enjoins it. And what their role is kind of like a mediator between the developer, what they might want to do, and here's what they could do to move this forward in an easier fashion. So while you think they may be the same, there is overlap, but there's very different authorities between the two.
Well, just to follow up on that, in that instance, if that were to happen, I'm pretty sure that the Affordable Housing Trust would pay attention and not hold back if there was a way that their involvement could increase the number of affordable units. We would certainly be doing that.
If you knew about it.
Right.
Oh, we'd know about it. Fran works with all
Fran
three of
would
the
tell.
boards, so I don't think you'd need to, I don't think that there's siloing here among these committees. I think that these are people who know each other and are working well.
When was the last time a 40B came to Groton?
Squanicook Hill?
2009, right?
Right, part of
Okay.
what I,
So you're
what
not
I was
too
gonna
busy.
say is,
Well, there's,
the reality is that, you know, the pace of development in this town is a lot slower than it was 10, 20 years ago. So we don't have lots of developers coming and proposing subdivisions.
I don't disagree with that, but I guess I'm struggling to understand where we have, as a community, kind of $500,000 set aside. I think that we have at least anecdotal evidence that there is a need for affordable housing. We have 3 housing entities comprising 15 individuals, potentially, and it feels like we're kind of in the driver's seat to try and get things started. And I'm not sure why that's the case.
Do you think, I'm not sure I understand, do you think someone else should be proposing it? We shouldn't be in the driver's seat, or?
I would have thought that the housing entities would have been, and that may be that I'm entirely wrong. I'm trying to understand, I guess.
So the Housing Partnership spent a long time in 2017 working with a developer over the property where you and I went and fought the burning house fire. Because at that point, the developer was planning to build a 40B and was willing to work with the town on it, and we were going to get more affordable housing units. And then, for reasons that I don't know, but I believe have something to do with figuring out how much, how successful it would be profitably for him, he changed his mind and decided to just build freestanding homes in a subdivision, and to build 9 units, and that's the threshold where you don't have to include any low-income units, any affordable units. So it wasn't, and due to anything, any action on any committee's part, that project disappeared and became not something that we could work with.
And I think that, before you go on, Peter, I'm sorry, but this is the kind of segue into, or expand upon what Becky was saying, that there has been talk about a 40B development on Jenkins Road, and there's nothing to be said that the developer couldn't come forward to the housing partnership. So they're an advocacy group that really needs to be there in the event that the developer wants to come along and engage in this friendly 40B project. And it's not that the partnership is against the creation of housing, they're completely for it. But when somebody comes along, they're there to help as an alternative to shepherd it through to the various boards, including our board, to get buy-in on that. Is that a fair statement, Peter?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair statement. And a lot of what happens, I think, is also driven by the, what the market is, what the needs of the market are, and what developers are interested in building or what they can build. So we're not necessarily going out, I think, actively soliciting, proposals from developers. We're, reacting to what they're coming in with once they come in and they present something, or they've looked at something that perhaps they can't do a conventional development and they decide they want to do a 40B, so how can they do it in a way that's, not adversarial with the town?
Yeah, I guess I'm really looking for a proactive.
Right.
This is a reactive. If a developer comes, we'll talk with him. I'm really hoping we can find a way that says, okay, we've got some land, let's go find us a developer, let's make the deal, and let's move on.
That is totally my hope as the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, that we are going to be able to do that. We are waiting for the final housing production plan to come to us that will have done some analysis and some evaluation of town-owned property. Obviously, we don't have, if we needed to buy property, it becomes probably impossible. But the town owns some parcels. And there are some ways that if we can do a little bit more analysis of a piece of property and then issue an RFP to developers to come in and build, that's my hope, that we're going to be able to do that.
And what's the timeline for that look like?
Well, I've never done it before. I think it's probably slower than any of us would want. The housing production plan is not yet done.
Well, I keep hearing a couple weeks, right?
I talked to Karen Chapman today, and we met with her today, or talk about that later in the meeting. We're hoping for next week. I think that's what she said to us today.
But
We're
also
not
there,
far away from that.
and also, as Josh alluded to, the Affordable Housing Trust is the entity that lost the most with Boynton Meadows. So to go back and ask the CPC for money before it's understood what happened with that money, I think has held them back for a while.
Yes.
Okay, but I think there's a lot of risk that to us being here a year from now, and I'll still be here. And be right where we are right now.
I wish that I could say that I know that we won't be, but I don't. I can't say that.
But if I may,
Yeah.
you know, the point is, I know the housing production plan's been delayed. They had some staff problems at the MRPC, MRPC?
Yes.
And they, you know, Karen has been working very hard for us on the green communities, which I'll update you in a little bit about. So once you get that housing production plan in, I think that is gonna be a nice springboard to bring these groups together to
Right.
do some work.
I
That's
will
my hope.
also, the housing summit is a great idea. I also have had a conversation with a member of the Community Preservation Committee who's also very anxious to move on affordable housing and had some resources that I didn't know about. We talked about having a joint meeting or some of us going to get more information from in that direction, bringing that resource in to meet with us, so.
One of the things, John, that you might want to take a look at, and Becky, you might want to take a look at, and Fran, I think you know about this, I don't know if you've seen it, but the selectmen, not the select board, the Board of Selectmen hired a consultant by the name of Richard Heaton back in 2010, I want to say. And we had a full report of town-owned property that listed the preferences for where to build affordable housing. And the number one choice came out as Prescott School. Obviously, that's changed. And there's ways of leveraging federal tax credits for ground leases to get a tremendous amount of money. Now, whether it happens at Prescott or it happens elsewhere, I think revisiting that housing report, because things haven't changed that much. As you pointed out, there's only so much town-owned land, and that analysis was done. So taking another look at that, certainly, I think would be a useful exercise of the trust.
That was before the whole Sarandon purchase?
No, Sarandon was,
That was,
Sarandon was
so
there.
that was one of the parcels that was identified, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fran's
So-
been very patient.
Did you?
Go ahead.
The-
Yeah, I
the
didn't
current-
realize she was making
The
some
current
suggestions.
contractor who's working from MRPC, is working on, had all of those prior reports available to her as she was working on this draft. And I don't know exactly when we'll see the draft, she is working on it, but she's their senior planner and she's plugging away, so.
So, I just want to remind us that the reason this came up was that there is a vacancy anticipated on the Affordable Housing Trust. The Select Board is charged with appointing all of the members of that trust. The rules say one Select Board member must be on it, and currently that's me. And the question was, before we advertise or try to seek a new person for the that vacancy, was there an interest for anyone else on this board to serve on the trust?
Well, I've already been asked that question. Been there, done that, not right now.
Okay. John, is it something you're interested in or have capacity for?
I don't, it's not clear to me that we need to get more selectmen
Yeah,
Right.
I know.
or select persons involved.
I have had some.
15 people is quite a corral
Exactly.
to keep together. And adding more to it just fills up the corral, but doesn't necessarily get us the forward motion, so.
I've had some promising conversations with people who might apply if we do advertise a vacancy.
Do you want us to advertise that vacancy right now, Becky? Or do you want to
I
wait until June 30th, or how do you want?
I think we should advertise as soon as possible.
And this will be a 3-year term, right? Or 2-year term?
It's
It's a 2-year
confusing to
term.
me. I
It's a
think
2-year
it's
term.
2 years.
It's a 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years, 2 years. I misspoke when I said 3, I meant to say 2.
Also,
All right, we'll
just
advertise.
before we leave the topic of vacancies, is it Brooks Lyman was a member of the Housing Authority. Is it our job to be seeking a replacement for him, or is that?
It would be a joint appointment between the Select Board and the Housing Authority. They have not came to us.
But it's not a state appoint.
No, he's an elected
appointed by
He was
the
an
state.
elected, Groton local election.
They could have liaisons between.
So it's an elected position.
Correct.
Can we, I mean, we've gone this long without someone, can we wait till the election?
I think that's what we're gonna do.
When was his term up?
Don will tell you.
The only reason I ask is that if there's current town elections going on and his term wasn't up, and obviously, unfortunately, he's no longer able to serve, that doesn't necessarily mean it comes up for election.
Right.
He was just re-elected last
So there'll be a 2-year seat, there will be a 2-year seat on the ballot for the Housing Authority.
So we need to make sure that we put that on.
We really want to publicize that,
Yeah.
if there's anybody from the press here.
And by the way,
Connie.
and by the way, there were 2 vacancies on the Housing Partnership.
Yes. Yeah, so everyone who's watching, if you're interested in housing, we
So
have
I
lots
hear-
of opportunities for you.
So I hear the concern that John's sharing and that Allison is concerned about, that you have 3 separate entities, and that you're having a hard time, let alone getting members for all these entities. But I really truly feel that there's 3 different jurisdictional authorities, even though it's all housing. And that the Housing Authority certainly deals with affordable, low-income housing, the management and the rental of that. And while they could deal with the creation of it, they haven't been. Then there's the Housing Partnership, which we've explained, which is more an advocacy, here, let me guide you through if you're interested, but they don't reach out necessarily to developers saying, hey, come do a friendly 40B here in Groton. But if somebody wants to do something like that, they're there for that. And then there's the Affordable Housing Trust that could be more proactive in this by applying for things. But I think that the wounds are still being licked over, being taken advantage of by a developer and making a bad investment. And that right now, everybody needs to come together, so I'll really reiterate. Once we get this housing production plan, we need to do a housing summit and include everybody, and let's come up with a collective plan, and whoever it may be, even if it's the select board, shepherd this thing forward to put a CPC application forward so we can build some affordable housing.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about.
Agreed.
So I'll advertise as requested. The Invasive Species Committee has recommended that the board appoint Jonathan Bosch to the
Thank you
committee.
all.
The committee would be, the appointment would be through June 30th, 2020. I would ask the board to make that appointment tonight.
Would someone like to make that motion?
I move that we appoint, I'm sorry,
Jonathan
I say it,
Bosch.
Jonathan Bosch to the Invasive Species Committee through June 30th, 2020.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
But I'm gonna ask in the future that we be provided with the application these
Yeah.
people have submitted for these things,
Sure.
so that we can see it before we come here and sit, because I don't know this gentleman.
It's a good idea.
Good point.
The, Becky has been working with Don Black on the Parks and Common policy. If you go to page 9 in your agenda, you will see the draft policy that Becky and Don came up with. The Park Commission is gonna take this up at their next meeting, but we brought it to you tonight to see if you were interested in this policy, making changes to it. And we also gave you a list of the various parks and commons here in Groton. This was put together by the Conservation Commission.
So at a high level, what is the difference between this proposal and what we currently have?
So what we currently what we had, which I actually didn't think to bring, was, maybe I did, a policy that first attempted to list the named parks and commons, and it was a list that was woefully inadequate. We each had questions about it.
Okay.
We also knew that we had at least one playing field that had been named, and we thought the fields should also be included. So the first part of the work that I did on this was to try to get an accurate list. And then, in fact, the list that's in this packet came, and it's incredibly detailed and long. And it was a requirement that the Conservation Commission, I think, create this list as part of the Open Space and Recreation Plan. So when I realized that we have such a complete and comprehensive list, I felt like there was no need for our policy to duplicate that. That list is being created and managed by another department quite successfully. The gist of the policy that we had focused on naming, and it had three slightly different three slightly different procedures for naming a park, or naming a common, or naming a memorial bench or garden, and it never mentioned fields. So Don Black and I got together, we talked about how to bring this policy into modern times. I don't think it had been touched for decades. And that then what we needed was a process for deciding to name a public property in honor of a specific person. And so that's what we focused on, how to do that.
And does this process mirror one of the three that was in the original?
I wouldn't say that. This process seemed better to both of us than, I mean, there are elements that were the same, but there was funny kind of jurisdictional mushiness in the original.
Okay, so does this change the criteria, or just the logistical process more so?
The criteria are again clarified. It has always been the policy, whether it was written or not, I think, that a Groton resident who was killed in the line of duty while serving in the military got something named for him or her, usually a common. We don't have a huge number of unnamed commons left. So we wanted to emphasize that that is pretty much an automatic thing, that something will be named. And we added the member of the police or fire department also killed in the line of duty. We thought that was a fairly obvious thing that we would want to do in the future. We don't specify that it would have to be a common, because in part, that is a Parks Commission decision. They really have jurisdiction over the properties. So this policy was written to address this, to make it sort of a two-step process. The first step is somebody proposes that we name something after somebody, and we want to have a joint decision by the Select Board and the Parks Commission that, yes, we should name something after this person. And then we can have conversation together. Our board certainly could recommend what we think is the appropriate kind of commemoration, whether it be a bench or a garden or a field or a new common or whatever. But that the Parks Commission, because they have the jurisdiction over the properties, should have the final decision on what and where. And when we had actually discussed this, you may remember at an earlier meeting, the Parks Commission definitely did not want us unilaterally revising this policy, and we said no, of course no, we would not do that because it involves both of us. So the idea was that our board would look at it. Parks Commission only meets once a month, so they have not had a chance to look at it, or maybe they did, I'm not actually sure.
I can't remember.
I haven't heard. But that we would approve it at a joint meeting, approve this policy. If we have any concerns about this now, we need to articulate them and get them over to the Parks Commission.
John?
I have one, when it comes to structures. I think you need some language in there that says that town property leased by the school district from the town are exempt from us naming schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think we and the Parks Commission both recognize that we have no jurisdiction over school issues,
Well,
naming schools.
we do own some of the buildings still. And So if we just identified in there, so we don't get a big brouhaha started here.
Okay.
That if we've leased a town building to the Groton Dunstable Regional School District, that is not going to get named by this
Well,
joint
wouldn't we
committee.
just say that
But
this
it's only one
policy?
building, though. We only lease one
That's
building.
okay.
Okay.
Wouldn't we just say this policy
Doesn't cover school buildings.
doesn't cover school buildings?
Period.
However you want to say it, I just,
Okay.
you know, we went through, I don't know, a couple years of argument that ended in north and south, because nobody could settle on any name.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think it took a
Oh.
couple of years. I don't think where it
Went on
would be
for a
going
long
on that
time.
long.
That's funny.
And then they settled on north and south middle school. Pretty interesting.
So, is that, do the rest of you feel like this policy needs to exempt, or it needs to specifically state this doesn't apply? I know, I understand that using the word structures could mean buildings,
Certainly.
but I didn't know what else to say. There's benches, there's flagpoles, there's a bandstand, there's, or the, whatever you call it, the gazebo. There's the Hanson Memorial Garden.
There's the transfer station. I mean, there's a lot of things you could apply this to. So, I mean, I really thought that we were talking about commons and parks. And all of a sudden, once structures got in here, I really would strike the word.
Well, but that's because in the existing policy, it talks about benches and gardens, and it doesn't talk about fields, but fields have been named. And so, you know, I think we should not leave vague that, you know, since we don't have a policy about it, somebody can just name a field after somebody without,
A field is fine. I don't have a problem with a field or a common. But once you start to get structures involved in this, and I understand you
Well,
may
there's
be talking about
benches.
a bench or a flagpole, then say benches, flagpoles, trees, gazebos, but shall not be a crosswalk or a, I'm really serious, because you're gonna get down into this minutia, and all of a sudden you're gonna have 300 things named in this town, and not that that's a bad thing, but there's a limit.
I think too, I mean, to me, and I don't know where I fall on this, but there's a concern also that once something has been named and created, there's a need to keep it up. I mean, we talked about this when I was on the school committee a little bit, and, you know, if you're gonna have a memorial bench, and what happens when the bench falls apart, and there are just a lot of pieces to this. And I share Josh's concern that this is getting very, very granular. You know, that you have a bench next to a flagpole within a common by a tree, you know, just,
And those are all nice if somebody gives a gift of a bench.
well, but we do have all of those things.
yeah, I don't know. And then personally, it's not something I'm gonna fight on. I would think that the Parks Commission and the Select Board could decide together, rather than deciding that someone is or is not worthy of something, and then the Parks Commission deciding what might or might not be available. But I don't know.
So Allison, you're thinking we should have more specificity about the things that are being named? I'm not following.
I prefer Josh's approach,
About
where it
what
was
can
kind of
be named.
parks, commons. I mean, to me, a field and a park are basically the same thing.
Fields, parks, and commons.
What about gardens? What about benches?
Somebody can give it, we can give an informal name to a garden, okay? I mean, I remember after Bruce Clements passed away, and after Vic Burton passed away, out in the Conservation Commission land behind Williams Barn, we put a stone honoring Bruce Clements, calling it Clements Trail, and we put a bench and a little plaque called Vic's Rest, okay? We didn't come to the Select Board, we didn't go to the parks, we went to the Conservation Commission, and they said, go for it. So I think that, as Allison pointed out, granular level, you gotta draw a line somewhere. That's all I can think
Okay.
of, that's all.
So-
Parks, fields, and commons. And if there happens to be a flagpole in the middle of a park, field, or a common, then it's the flagpole at Fred's Common.
So the existing policy talked about benches. So,
Wipe it out. Not the bench, the concept of naming
I'm not following you. What do you mean? Don't name benches? We're not gonna allow benches, or
it.
we're
Let
gonna
the
allow?
Parks Department deal with naming the bench if it's in the Parks Department, but a bench is a small, isolated thing. While it might be important to the family that may have donated the bench, or somebody that might get it, it's like, we're really getting into the weeds here. Next thing you know, we'll be naming swamps. you know.
I think to me too, there's a concern around, parks, fields, commons are all a
Wetlands.
certain magnitude. I'm personally not comfortable with the idea of like so-and-so only deserves a bench or they deserve to me, including all of these things just is creating more difficulty than it resolves.
So, you'd like to take out the language that says and/or other structures?
It just says parks, fields, gardens, and commons. How about
Commons,
gardens?
parks, fields, and gardens?
When would a garden not be part of a park or a?
Well, because, for
It's on a
instance.
traffic light, like at the corner of Hollis Street.
No, that's
That's a
not.
common.
No, but there's a large common on Hollis Street that has a specific area that was the Wojtowicz Memorial. It's a garden that is a memorial. There's the Hanson Memorial, it's a garden, and it's on
That's right.
the town common, so that's,
Leave it to the Parks Department to name the benches and the flagpoles and the gardens that are contained within the fields, commons, and parks. So
Okay,
if we
so-
just take this policy and apply it on the larger scale level,
Yeah.
that's not to say that the Parks Department can't give the name to a bench or a dugout or, whatever it
Okay.
might be.
okay, so I'll take out the and/or
That's
other
all.
structures.
It's not that I'm against it, we're just gonna be, having a lot of meetings with the Parks Department. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think it's just gonna waste their time and our time over something the Parks Department can deal with on their level. Does that make sense,
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm just, if you're gonna use the word structure, then I have some
I get
Okay.
it,
concerns.
get it.
But we don't need to do that. I mean, you could even do, like memorial bench. You could put some more specifics in there if you wanted to, but I think we do well with parks and fields and,
Okay, I'll take out the references to
But
structure.
everything else is good in here in terms of the naming and, how you've done it. That's really the only issue
Right.
that I have. I'm not picking this out, picking on it. I think this is very good. It needed to be done.
Okay, I'll take out all the references to structures and leave it, and then see, they also have to discuss it, maybe they'll have some
All right.
other
and
suggestions.
is everybody comfortable with G? I guess it's 2G. I'm not uncomfortable with it.
I
I just
don't
want
love
to
it,
make
but-
sure.
As long as the word structure's out, I'm okay with it.
No, but down G says the select board may recommend a location, structure, that would need to go away, or type of memorial, but the park commission will have the final decision.
What's wrong with us making a recommendation?
I don't, I'm just asking to make sure everybody's seen
I
it.
think this was pretty strong, that the Parks Commission felt like that is their prerogative, and I didn't see that we needed to overrule that.
Well, perhaps the final decision, well, no, I'll leave that alone. But we do have to get structure out of there,
Yep,
Yep.
I'll take structure out every place that shows
and the
up.
one above it.
Yeah,
Yes,
anytime
yep.
the word structures
Yep.
occurs, let's get rid of it.
And the clause structures or others, and/or other structures, right,
Yep.
yeah.
All right, so we will look forward to another revision of that.
So I've also enclosed in the report the liaison policy. John had suggested that the board take the following action tonight. One, notify all boards, committees, and commissions of the policy to various boards has changed. Now it's only elected. Provide each entity previously entitled to a select board liaison with a copy of the new policy, which we can do. And then assign select board members to the various entities entitled to have a liaison under the new policy. So if you go to page 13 in your packet, you'll see the policy that the board adopted for liaisons. And then on
Well-
the page 14 is a list of where you would have liaisons.
Right.
You're missing one.
Well, I had,
Oh.
yes, a
Who am I
lot of
missing?
questions about that list, but first of all, can we go back to the other first page, because in the very first line, it says selectmen. Can we say that define the
Oh,
role?
I'm sorry, I should have caught that
role
when
of
we
the select
adopted the
board
policy.
liaison?
And then you correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but isn't another elected board the Neshoba Valley?
Well, there's a whole
Neshoba
lot,
Tech?
No, that's appointed, you
No.
appoint the members to
Oh,
that.
that's not, well, I've never served on it, so I don't know, sorry.
wait,
What about West Groton Water?
We don't,
are we looking at the list now
This
of,
list,
we don't
these are
have,
elected,
I think their trustees are appointed
elected,
at their
I don't know,
town meeting.
I was
It's
just,
not on our ballot.
it's elected.
okay.
so our discussion previously was that it was gonna only be to the other elected boards?
This is the policy that you adopted on December 16th.
To define
2019.
Other elected boards, committees, and commissions.
Correct?
So, Conservation Commission is not elected, that's
Nope.
why they're not there. Community
Correct.
Preservation is not,
They're appointed.
These are the people that we elect, right here. You're looking at the list.
Everything else is appointed.
That's right off the ballot.
it just seemed like, those were not necessarily the places that we needed coordination. That wasn't comprehensive, but,
Well, this is, like I said, this is the
Right, I mean-
policy that this board adopted less than 2 months ago.
I went back, I couldn't, I knew that we'd had some discussion, and I just didn't remember what the decision had been.
We did, and
This.
yes, so this was the decision, I think largely because we got caught up in the weeds in terms of trying to define who we would be having liaisons to. And ultimately, we decided that if we kind of limited it to the elected entities, that made the most sense, that the boards and departments are largely represented through the town manager's office. And it was kind of the best way to move forward.
That doesn't mean that any of us can't informally work with the DPW, the fire, the police.
Absolutely.
I'm having deja vu. This is the exact conversation we had when we set this
Understood.
policy.
I think another
It's not
reason,
deja vu, it's bringing it back up.
Oh, okay.
I think another
Rouge
reason was
a day.
to, reduce the number
Right.
so that,
Right.
those of us will have more time to spend, on a fewer number
Yep.
of these organizations. And it just seemed to me like a logical way, a logical break, was then, and still is, creating liaisons with other elected boards, so that, the select board members can be involved in how these boards are being steered and how they tie into what the select board has identified as things it wants to see achieved. I mean, I think right now we have like 40 liaisons or something like that.
We have a number
When
of
was the
them.
last time you went, you know?
June, or July, June, we set it up in June.
We
this
did.
year.
So I printed out the list of what our current liaison assignments are and compared it with this list. I think the two entities that are on this list that we don't currently have representation assigned to are the Housing Authority and then the Trust Fund Commission.
So I would be happy to take the Housing Authority in order to help increase the crossover between the
Okay.
housing boards.
Sounds good. I then went through and kind of counted how many assignments each of us had. Josh, you are down one. Would you be willing to take on the Trust Fund Commission? Currently, you are with the Groton Water.
Yeah, sure.
Is that, all right. All right, so then we don't need to make any other changes.
So who is who on this list now?
So the Board of Health, Becky is you. I'm currently on the Planning Board. And then, Groton Dunstable.
Are you sure this is this year's list you're looking at? Because,
June 11, 2019.
Absolutely.
and I was Board of Health there?
Yep,
Yep.
Board of Health / recycling.
They're elected.
Okay,
That's
interesting.
one of the difficulties we've had with this process. Groton Water will be Josh. Sewer, John, was you. Groton Electric was John Riley. Library, Becky, was under you. The Parks Department, John, was under you. The assessors was John Riley. And then if we put Becky, if we put you on the Housing Authority liaison, and then Josh to the Trust Fund Commission, we will all have
So who is
two, I
planning board?
believe. I am Planning Board and Groton Dunstable.
Oh, yeah.
So Becky is Housing Authority.
And
Josh
library. And who's
is
assessor?
trust.
Well,
John Riley.
the liaison is to the trustees of the public libraries, the trustees.
Yep.
Yes.
We may want to send a notice out if we approve
That's-
this tonight.
That's,
the
that's
next
what
step,
we're gonna
absolutely.
do.
Okay, so in fact, you're right, it's been confusing. I had remembered and said that I was the liaison to the Parks Commission, which I had been previous years, but I wasn't this year. And so that's why I've been negotiating with just Don Black over this policy. But when we're done, John Geiger, I guess you take over on that one.
I don't know about
Before we
that.
know it, we will be throwing all of these up in the air again after elections and
And I thought that Board of Health had passed from me to somebody else, but never mind.
all right.
Okay, so I will, Allison, I will
Yes,
send out
please.
notices to all the new committees, or all the committees and who your liaison is. And I will notify all the other liaisons
policy,
that
the
we no
chairs.
longer have liaisons. Is that,
Activating that.
Yeah.
is that what we're doing?
Yes.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay,
Thank you.
We don't have formal liaisons.
correct, that's what I should say, formal liaisons. We will take care of that.
I guess I also became aware in our conversation with the water commissioners that there's certainly been variability in the amount of, I don't know, involvement and layer of awareness for how we do the liaison position. And I don't know if there's any way to kind of standardize that. I
When,
could not possibly meet that standard that was described.
No.
I thought that when there is a meeting that occurs by one of the boards to which we are assigned, that is pertinent to our board, that we ask them to give notification to the liaison so they could attend the meeting. I mean, wouldn't that simplify it? I mean, it's pretty
Yes.
much the thrust of things.
So will you include that when you send out your note,
Yeah, we can.
Wouldn't
Mark.
hurt, Mark?
Mark, that we, the liaison would appreciate being informed or
Well,
invited?
It's
if
really
there's
easy to
something
do.
specific.
You go to the
Exactly.
website
Yeah,
and
I
You'd
don't
read all the
disagree-
minutes.
I don't disagree with you, John, okay? However, if you know there's something that's pertinent to our board that's being discussed by their board, and it seems like a lot of stuff's gonna be happening with the water department, and the water superintendent's trying to get me down to Batacook, so I have to get down there and take another tour. Hopefully I find no Mr. Coffee machines in use. That's what we need to do.
yes, but
Yes.
I think we should, once assigned to one of these, try to make as many of their meetings as we can. We can't make them all, but
I
try
get
to
it.
make as many of them as we can, individually.
Do we have public comment?
Wow.
With water meeting on Monday nights, does Josh then miss the select board's meeting?
If there's something that's relevant, I would say, to the select board that is very vital, then I would have to step out of the meeting as long as there's not something super vital here to attend that portion of their agenda.
Well,
That would be my simple answer.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry.
I think we, in sending out the letter to these organizations, ask that they move their meetings so they don't conflict with Monday nights.
I think that's
Well,
really.
the Board of Health will never do that.
No.
They-
Board of
they-
Health's not moving their Monday night
They're not
meetings.
moving their meetings.
I
The-
think if they
believe-
notify us, we can just leave it up to the liaison's discretion as to which they
Yeah,
attend.
you've excused yourself.
I've
from
excused
that.
myself to go to
That's
Board of Health meetings twice in the last month and a half.
But
2
the only
months.
board that meets on Monday nights, sometimes the electric light does, but they meet it earlier in the day, is the Board of Health. That's the only elected board that meets on Monday nights, correct? All right,
All right.
I was liaison to community preservation, which meets on Monday nights.
Now
and
you don't have to
Board
worry
of
about that
Health meets
anymore.
on Monday nights. So.
so I updated, as we discussed, I'm updating the select board's meeting schedule.
Thank
So
you.
here's the schedule. I did make the change on the meeting of March 30th, workshop on the town manager review policy. I pushed things around on when we're gonna do certain things. I'm
Right of
hoping this
first refusal.
production plan happens. The Green Communities Grant review, I will get to that under the update, the ongoing list update. But hopefully that will be the 24th, we'll be bringing you our grant review to you. And I think this is a pretty good schedule, so does anybody see anything I've missed?
Well, you're gonna have to move the appointment to the Parks Commission till the 24th.
Well, yeah, when I put this together,
Right,
yeah,
right.
so that'll be on next week's agenda, correct?
Can you send out some information on the right of first refusal on
Yeah.
the Hayes property, please?
That'll be in your packet, we'll get that out to you, absolutely.
But could you,
I'm waiting to hear back from the Conservation Commission. Planning Board has already notified us that they're not interested. I'm gonna get the assessors back taxes to you. There's a letter from Bob Collins, he's the developer's representative, there'll be a letter from him in your packet, and then I'll hopefully have something from the Conservation Commission.
So what is the problem with the 24th?
What problem with it?
Well,
Oh, the housing production plan, I'm hoping that's the night that we look at the first draft of it.
okay.
That's the hope. Any other questions on that? Okay.
I had a question.
Yes.
Just when you, not for Mark. John Geiger, did you mention that you were doing some work on the town manager's review policy?
On the what?
Mm-hmm.
Town manager's review
Yes, I
policy?
am.
Yep.
Is
I
there,
have been.
so I guess what's the timetable that you might be sharing some of that? Is it not till the 30th?
Well, I have heard you mention, we should have a workshop for that.
Right.
I don't know where anybody's going with it, so I picked up the ball and said, let me see if I can put something on the table that people can think about so that we don't spend a whole morning somewheres and not wind up with a solution.
So I also had some, thank you, I appreciate you doing that. I also had some thoughts about that maybe we ought to get ask our town council for other examples of how other towns do this.
I have gone and with the help of Melissa obtained 10 or 12 reports that
okay.
other towns use.
Okay,
And I've gone through with her a couple of times. I've talked with Mark a couple of times, and we ultimately will have to go to, if you decide it's what you want to do, then it's going to have to go to town council. But there's no point in burning lawyer money
right.
up
We also have the
till we
personnel
have something that
board.
we're all in agreement on.
Yeah, I don't know if our personnel board could be helpful on this. It's another resource that doesn't cost money.
We will discuss all of this at our workshop.
Okay.
Although I would ask if there's something prior to the workshop that we could see just to have for background data, does that work?
We will get it in our packet prior to the workshop. Moving on.
Budget. I thought, Bud, you wanna come up to the table just in case you wanna,
Hypothetically, if Bud has something to say.
just in case he has something to say.
Come to the
You might not
big
have
table.
anything, but, so Saturday, I thought Saturday's meeting was excellent. I thought we covered a lot of important ground. I thought we had a lot of information before us. So I don't wanna rehash everything that we talked about on Saturday. The one thing I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna ask Connie, I gave a list of reductions. That was just samples. I don't want people to freak out that, all of a sudden we're gonna start eliminating positions. That was just.
This is
if
for the
we-
5-year
Correct.
view.
Yeah, just if we got this. So I hope, Connie, when you put it in the paper, because I really went at length on Saturday, and I know you were there, saying this is just an idea, just to show you what the type of impact may be. So just, I don't want people all of a sudden thinking, oh, I'm gonna lose my job.
I did put it in my story.
You listed every single reduction? Oh,
No, I can do that.
if you don't mind. Because I just don't want to have people panic, because I don't know if that's gonna happen. It may not. And I know I'm just concerned, you know, I've talked to department heads, they understand where we're coming from. Some of the employees have said, oh, by the way, your name showed up on the list. Don't freak out about it. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that. It was just an idea,
And,
hypothetical.
and we met
Yes.
after this, Mark, myself, and Trish and Don, and I went through, I had come up with a list that was different, and I said, since there's so many different lists, you know, there are dramatic lists, and then there's, as Mark mentioned in the meeting, he said, I eliminated wages increases in year 1. He didn't eliminate them in year 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. If you do that, not that it would pass, but if you did that, then that would make a dramatic difference on the other reductions, because that's worth a couple $100,000.
Correct.
In addition to that, there's some benefits that were $100,000 that we could roll forward if that, so there's a lot of money that could happen differently that doesn't amount to eliminating positions till probably 3 or 4 years if we still have a problem.
Yeah, and we don't know what the future holds. We don't know if the Groton Dunstable Regional School District can absorb the types of reductions that we're talking about, as we talked about on Saturday. But the bottom line is I think everybody has a really good understanding of what the next few years hold for us. And I think it was a good conversation. So I guess my question to the board tonight is, you have a balanced budget in FY '21. You have it. Now, I don't know what the impact of a $200,000 cut from the Groton Dunstable Regional School District will do, or even if their budget requires more, because I know there's some issues out there with special ed that we all need to be concerned about. I laid out a 5-year override to you, because that's what I was asked to do, to show what the potential impact was. So, is this something the board wants to continue to pursue? Because if we're going to do that, we need to do it soon, because the election is on May 19th.
Well, town meeting is,
Well, town meeting is also April 27th. So we need to, the board needs to decide if they want to pursue that or push it off a year. It's important to note that because of health insurance savings that we had this year, I was able to restore things into the budget, as I indicated to you on Saturday. I'm still concerned about the $98,000 with the grant, but that's an issue that we have to wait and see how it affects our revenues and our free cash down the road. So I guess the board needs to debate and decide where you see this going.
I agree
with that?
Yeah, and we're gonna be meeting, like I said,
We're meeting on the 25th.
5th,
Yeah.
and we'll discuss where we, as a FinCom, believe where we should go next year, i.e. '21. But again, we can't, if we wanted an override, we can't do the override. I mean, it's all the select board.
It's the select board's call.
You heard my position, but again, I don't know what they sort of said it, but we only had 4 out of 7 members, which we should have all 7 on that Tuesday, and we will discuss not only what happened at the meeting, but what they thought of the meeting, and is there any other things they want to have people come in and discuss. I didn't hear more from the fire chief or whatever, but my guess is it'll all be about the numbers that Mark presented, more focused on 21, not necessarily 22 and 23 and 24. Those numbers are there, but, you know, they're not as important as the 21 numbers.
So for me, I do not support even contemplating an override at this point. You know, I think that to go forward and explain in 8 weeks why we need an override of multiple $1 million when we've just kind of redone the math sort of thing and had some good news and suddenly we don't need an override this year is going to be really, really hard to explain. You know, I think that there's been some motion toward being a little bit less conservative in the budgeting, which I think is good, but to go forward at this point would be really hard to explain, and I think it would jeopardize Florence Roche next year. I don't know where others are at. Yes.
So, one thing that I'm aware of, having been on this board a couple of years now, is that we don't actually get a clear picture of what the next year's budget is going to look like until mid to late January, and then it all of a sudden already feels like it's too late to decide to have an override this year because there's not enough time to really explain that need to people. And I'm not sure how we get around that because we're already, predicting things for a year and a half into the future and to try to push that earlier. But I guess I just want to remind us all that if we are thinking by the end of the fall that it's still going to look like we really will need an override, we need to start understanding that earlier or make the decision as early in January as is feasible.
Well, I agree with you 100%. We worked hard over the summer with the school district and the select board and the FinCon, trying to figure out what 21 was going to look like. We estimated at that time we were going to have about a $500,000 deficit. When we put the initial budget together, that's what it pretty much came out. The two biggest unknowns, or the three biggest unknowns in the budget when I'm preparing it on December 31st is to know what health insurance rates are going to be.
Right.
Those don't come out till this week. They just voted them today. The Groton Dunstable Regional School District final assessment. Now, they have worked very cooperatively with us the last couple of years to give us as much information early as possible. I think it's benefited us. And then the third big unknown is Neshoba Tech.
Right.
So those are the three biggest parts of the budget when you think about it. Forget about police and fire for a second. And I don't get that information until after I submit the budget. So I have to give you my best guess, and we're pretty close most of the time when we give you those numbers. But you're right, Becky, it's hard. By the time you get those numbers, you're into January, February, and town meetings in April.
Right.
So it's very difficult.
But
So the other
it's
thing
it's also the case that with the state, their budget isn't final till July,
Correct.
right?
Right, so.
And so all state aid is an estimate,
Correct.
all right? And it could change drastically.
Yep.
So
State aid
it's
only
sort of the
represents-
nature of the
Well, the
beast.
school district though, our portion, but the school district, which affects the assessment, that's what John's talking about.
So, I am not in favor of, I don't see any reason to go for an override this year. But I also think that in the future, the idea of a 5-year override that may seem too long. I mean, I think a lot of people would say, wow, predicting 5 years ahead of time is really shaky. And if we thought we needed an override, and if we thought that we were going to need them for several years, we might consider a 3-year override rather than a 5-year. It's just a thought for in the future.
So to me, part of the struggle is that it feels like every year we predict that we'll need an override for the next several years, and then at least so far we've been fortunate that we haven't. To me, I would need to see some pretty dramatic cuts proposed kind of in real time before I could support a multi-year override. I don't know where John and Josh, where you guys are at.
Go ahead,
I don't
Josh.
think I've changed my position on a 5-year override, but I will say that I've changed my position for this year for moving forward with a 5-year override. We don't need it this year. It's been proven to me. However, I do strongly believe that unless the town manager is successful in collective bargaining and reopening contracts and renegotiating contracts and keeping our spending, which has averaged between 4 and 4.5% increases per year, I believe, or is it 3%? 3% increase, while the costs are growing at 4.5, 4 to 4.5.
Total 4.5, because primarily the school not getting that 10 million
Yeah.
bucks.
So my
Increase.
point is that we're outstripping ourselves unless we have huge cash influxes by new growth exceeding expectations, and people going out and buying new cars right and left, and excise tax numbers coming up, and the Groton Inn at 6% room tax, and other people who are subject to that, having high occupancy rates, and going to restaurants and spending lots of money on food, that there's only so much ways of getting new revenues into the stream. And at the end of the day, I don't like being a naysayer, but the numbers are written very clearly on the wall, and each year we're somehow able to avoid getting into this override situation. So we may be having this discussion again next year. And if it does prove itself that all of a sudden the doomsday scenario is in front of us, a one-year override as a Band-Aid year after year after year, in my opinion, is not going to be successful. So let's come back on this in the future. And for now, I'm not going to support an override this year.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm listening to all you, and I agree 100%. I never want to go for an override of Proposition 2.5. On the municipal side of the budget, we have been able to maintain services, and we've been staying with growth rates under 3% on the municipal side on average for the last 11 years that I put budgets together. Everything is driven on the town budget by, unfortunately, what's happened with the state aid to the Groton Dunstable Regional School District. They cannot maintain their budget growth because a third of their budget comes from the state, and that's not growing, and that gets pushed back on the towns. If there's a way for us to work with the Groton Dunstable Regional School District to address that, we may never need an override of Proposition 2.5. The municipal budget's not driving that as much as what's happening at the state level to the school district. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yep.
So we need to work cooperatively with them. We are able to maintain services on the town side and keeping our growth rate under 3%. We've done that the last 4 years. As a matter of fact, since you've given me the guidance, starting in fiscal year 15, we had the initial 2.2 or whatever that was. 2.29, we have stayed under 3% on the municipal budget. We've done a very good job doing that, and I want to continue to do that for us. So I agree, we don't need to do an override this year to balance the budget. I'm just concerned with what the school district is facing in sped costs. I don't want to negatively impact that school district. I want to work with them because, you know, they have a good school district, and I want to be able to continue that.
And unless the state formula for aid changes,
I know,
then there's nothing you can do, or the school committee can even do, to control these things.
That's right.
I mean,
right.
you can try, but it's not gonna be effective.
So I guess my question then, what I would like the board to think about over the next 2 weeks, we meet on the 24th again, and the FinCom's meeting the night of the 25th to go through their budget. I gave you the budget, the new town manager's recommended balanced budget on Saturday. I'd like you to think about that to make sure you're comfortable with what I've restored based on the reductions that we've had in health insurance and the like. And I'd like to be able to go to the Finance Committee on the 25th with a message from the Select Board. This is how they feel about the budget. So if that's okay, Allison, I'd like to have that conversation on the 24th.
Yep, that sounds
Bud,
good.
that good with you?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's nothing under other business. I'd like to get into the ongoing issues list. The Prescott School sprinkler system. We've set the bid date. We are going out to bid on March 11th. That's when it is going to appear in the Central Register. And the bids will be due on April 15th. So those are the dates.
It's gonna show up on March 11th?
It goes on the Central Register on March 11th, with the bids due on April 15th.
Oh, April 15th.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. With the water department manganese, I sent you an email this afternoon that is privileged because it has to do with executive session, but we are continuing to work with DEP on that matter. I've given you a lot of information. If there's any questions, please contact me, and we will talk about that. The Water Commission is meeting tomorrow night to review the response back from DEP.
You want me to go to that meeting?
I would love for you to be at that meeting tomorrow night, if you can be.
Tomorrow's
Tuesday.
Time do they meet?
They're gonna go into executive session. The meeting, I believe, starts at 7, Don? Hold on one second, Josh. Well, Don looks that up. So anyway, that's,
If they would allow me to attend the executive session, which I don't see why they wouldn't.
I would hope they
Check
would.
on that, let me know if you would.
Will do. MS4 permit, no update from last week. Nothing's changed there. Polystene containers.
Well, they had their hearing.
I think I mentioned that, didn't I?
last Tuesday.
Oh, it was after our
last meeting. And,
Correct.
some of us attended and learned a lot.
So they're gonna come in hopefully on the 24th potentially to update you on the outcome of their hearings and where they're going. I apologize, you're right, Becky, they met after we had our meeting. And then I talked to a lot of you individually, like, I'm getting old, I guess. Huh? Older, yeah.
Josh, the water commission meeting is starting at 7:30, the executive session is on the agenda for 8:20.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Green Communities application and implementation. Very excited that we got accepted, as you know. I sent out the notification to that. On today at 1 o'clock, I met with our little team, which is made up of Becky, myself, Takashi, a representative from the DPW, Karen Chapman, and Dawn. And we have $138,000 in grant money that we can spend on projects this year. We are putting together, or we have put together, a list of potential projects totaling $138,000. We will have that draft application to you on the 24th to look at, but my goal, and I think Becky agreed with me, is we want to be able to apply projects that we can get accomplished over the next year so that we're ready to go forward on the competitive grant round next February. So we have a year to get that done. So that's our goal. So we're looking at projects that will help us save energy and are good for us to accomplish, such as weatherization of the town hall, changing lights in various buildings in town to address that, fixing an issue over at the fire station within the kitchen area. So I think we came up with a good list of projects today, and we'll have a draft application for you on the 24th. Becky, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, it
Okay.
was a good meeting.
It was, it really was.
I was
Yes.
under the impression that that list of anticipated projects was part of the original grant.
Correct. It's from the list that we applied to become a green community.
But that list has been updated, Allison, and,
Well, that's part of the question I had. I went online looking for that application to see that list.
Oh, I thought I sent that application to you.
You may have, I just went online. I did not go back through.
well,
all the
Okay, let me
emails.
find it
we
for you.
had,
But
we
that
had
would be great.
received the copy of the preliminary list, but it's been changed.
Yes, it
Remember,
has.
you looked at my list and you said, how come yours is yellow, and the one
Yep.
we were looking at today was all green? And there was different amounts and labeling of certain projects.
Yeah, so it would be
I'll
good to
send that back
understand
out
what
to you.
that current list
Absolutely.
is.
Absolutely. The one thing that we decided today, though, that we weren't gonna look at any potential projects was the Florence Roche Elementary School until such time as we know what that project is going to be. But I will send out the list, to the board.
And just, I think it was reassuring to hear from, the DPW representative that a number of these things that were identified by the consultant for the Green Communities application were in fact, items that they have had on their list.
Absolutely.
So these are in fact some capital items that have been on the radar to be replaced, and so it's good that we can do them with this grant.
Absolutely. With regard to the Florence Roche Elementary School feasibility study, I sent you out the PDP last week. I'm sure you've all gone through all 876 pages
I did.
and are ready to talk about it.
So I was just gonna ask, since it is so overwhelming, and I want to feel like I'm doing the responsible thing to keep on top of this,
Yes.
but is there like an executive summary at some point, or is that just, when do we, the rest of us who aren't reading every one of the 850 pages need to really pay more attention?
So I would say probably the meat of it, a lot of it is appendices and reports from the mechanical folks and that kind of thing. I would say the meat of it is probably
Yeah.
less than 100 pages. It's the first maybe 8 sections, which at a pretty high level, you should be able to, I think, scan. The first one's an introduction, then there's a summary of the educational program from the schools, there's an existing situation summary, there's a couple sections of proposed sections we're gonna move forward with. So that's kind of where that is at this point. The PDP restricted it down to three scenarios. One being basically a renovation and addition to the current existing building, obviously in the same location. The second one being a new building kind of located where the track is currently on that same Florence Roche Middle School parcel. And the third one being a different shaped new building behind where the kind of soccer and baseball fields are behind the middle school. So those are the three options that are in there. The first one is in there largely because MSBA requires it to be. At this point, we haven't obviously drilled down to a dollar level, but the back of the envelope is that to renovate and do the addition in place would cost more than a new building, so that's probably not going to make a heck of a lot of sense. So those are the three kind of options that have gone forward to MSBA for their input. And the committee is meeting starting tomorrow night to start to refine down to a final solution, which probably will be some amalgam of the two new structures somewhere on that site, but probably not in either of the currently proposed conceptual locations.
Or is there another location?
No, I mean, so right now there's where the building is, there's the track, and then there's the fields.
Right.
My guess is that it's gonna end up being somewhere between kind of the track and the existing building, or, you know, that it's not, we're gonna slide the Lego house around a little bit and see where it falls into place.
I agree with that.
At this point, I think the cost-wise, we're talking more than we had initially perhaps anticipated. We do still have the 48% reimbursement rate on the eligible costs. So we're thinking that the town piece of it is gonna be hopefully closer to $50 million, realistically $60 million. And we'll obviously have more details on funding mechanisms and plans and options as we go forward.
Is there a general sense of the percentage, when the state decides the things that they will reimburse, their participation will end up being at a 30%, 40%, whatever?
Well,
48%
it's 48% of eligible costs,
Right, but
which may be 30% of the project.
About a third.
yeah,
That's what you're asking.
yes.
That, we haven't narrowed it down because there's still more work to be done by the committee to figure out the size of the gym, the size of the library, the size of this and that. And that's how you'll get the final issue. But the important number is 48% of the eligible costs, if that makes sense.
Yep. Other questions
Well,
on
and
that?
those are broken down by many, many parts.
Right.
Correct.
So it's like, okay, you're gonna have stoves in the kitchen. Well, we'll only pay this much for stoves in the
Correct.
kitchen. So you really have to go through that whole
It's a
thing
big drill
before you
down.
can figure it out.
Yep.
That's right. And that's what the building committee's embarking on next. And
What's
we
this-
have some great expertise helping us do that. And I would also point out that I am gonna be meeting with our financial advisor because I wanna make sure I can come back to this board so that you understand exactly how the reimbursement works and how our funding mechanism from the town and what the impact to the taxpayers will be. I think that's really important as well.
Do you have a question, Becky?
What's the number of students that?
645, the school is being built for 645 students. There won't be 645 students in it the day it opens, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Allison.
Correct, that's the-
But based on the projections, that's the size this building needs to be for the town of Groton.
And a lot of
That's
the,
what it's-
yeah, I was gonna say, a lot of the MSBA reimbursements are X amount in this category based on the pupil count. So that's the agreed upon number that the MSBA has authorized for.
Correct.
So if we, for whatever reason, wanted to build a school for 700 people, they're only gonna reimburse us that 48% on the 645 number
Correct.
that they've agreed to.
Correct.
So when the first
tell you
middle
how
school
many
was built,
Bathrooms you can have for 645.
Yep.
If you want more, you pay for it.
Exactly, that's exactly how it works.
when the first middle school was built, there was, my recollection was, and that the state actually, I think, was involved in this decision, and that some of the, like the cafeteria, library, and gym were built for potentially larger capacity, than the classrooms, with the idea that an addition would be put on, and then an addition was put onto that building. Is that likely to be done?
They are talking about, as a matter of fact, part of the plan has to show, the state requires this, if you were to expand that building, where would you expand it? So yes, that has to be part of the study.
But that building, the core facilities for larger than the 650 kids?
It's the core facilities for the 645 kids.
You can build more.
Oh, you can build more, but
You're
it's
just gonna
100%
pay
your cost.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it wasn't that way in the past.
Highway garage renovations, no new update on that. We have a
Aren't they
meeting tomorrow.
just about done?
It is done.
It is
But
done.
we're waiting to, the generator, and there was some final things that had to be done in the new structure. But that project is, the highway department is operating out of the highway garage as we speak. And that's all I have, Allison.
Very good, thank you. Does anyone have any liaison reports? All right, then we have one set of minutes from February 3rd, regular meeting. Does anyone have any corrections or questions on that?
No, good minutes, Don.
Yeah.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes of February 3rd, 2020 as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Mark,
Yep,
when is the date that the warrant closes?
next Friday, 21st. And you'll have a draft warrant to you on March 2nd.
Sounds good. Anything else, folks? All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you.